I'm Tom Latane. I have a blacksmith shop in Pepin, Wisconsin. Today I'm in Alma, Wisconsin at the Castlerock Museum. I've been repairing items at the museum for 35 years and I'm here to talk about locks. These locks that I'll talk about are iron locks made before the Industrial Revolution. This is a door bolt made of iron that was used for securing the door when a person was inside the room, but would be no good for locking the door or unlocking it from the outside. This one has no spring behind it, which would cause friction, preventing the bolt from sliding forward when the door was slammed on its own inertia. Sliding forward as the door would slam would cause the bolt to strike the keeper on the door jamb, damaging the bolt and the keeper potentially. This door bolt is probably 19th century, judging by the fact that the spring that causes friction that keeps it from sliding forward too easily is mounted to the plate behind the bolt rather than being fastened to the back of the bolt. This has a depression forged at the back of the bolt that matches the width of the staple. That way, when the bolt is slid forward, the spring pushes that depression up, and the shoulder on the bolt then prevents it from being withdrawn unless the bolt is pushed forward, depressing the spring and pulling it back. So though the Egyptians were making wooden locks 4,000 years ago, I'm going to concentrate on iron locks because as a blacksmith, that's my interest. In a lock, the keyhole is the first line of defense. The key has to fit into the keyhole before it can activate anything within the lock. So these 9 keyholes take different shaped keys. This solid key fits in up here, but will not fit in any of the other keyholes. This one that has a curved bit on the key only fits in that keyhole. The hollow key fits over a pin around which it will rotate in the lock. And that pin is the second line of defense as an option in many locks. So there are several ways of making tubular keys. This one is one that I found in an antique shop. It was broken and so very affordable. This has been formed by rolling a tube out of sheet and then brazing that tube up the center where the two edges meet. The two edges have been scarfed and overlap each other, giving more surface area for the brass to melt against than a butt joint. The collar that gives more strength at the top to resist the torque applied in working the lock is also wrapped around and scarfed and brazed. The bow on this one is cut into a slot straight across. Sometimes they're mounted on top and the bottom of the bow has a tenon that fits into the hole in the center of the tube, but this one you can see isn't even in the middle, so that's the first indication that it probably did not have a tenon down it, and the fact that it's set into a slot cut across the top of the collar. This one has been flattened and rolled. You could see the solid stock here. This little Y shape there is where the key was flattened from here forward and then rolled back around and closed up. It's been brazed down here that there isn't even any brass up there. The bit has then been brazed on. This one is one that I made, but it's a copy of an old one. This has a tube that was rolled up and brazed up the center here. The bit was brazed on over top of the joint in the tube, which helps strengthen that joint. And instead of a collar being wrapped around, this bow was forged and a tenon on the end below this filed collar was brazed into the top of the tube. This one is a later key. The bit that's been cut in a profile on the end is often a 19th century style, and this one has been drilled. This key is a complex shape. This could not pivot around a pin. The pin would be triangular, and this fit into a cylinder with the shape of the key in there and a triangular pin in the center. The whole cylinder would rotate. This is a fabricated tube. The V was formed in a swedge, and then the bit, which has not yet been cut for any particular lock, was swedged, forming the spline and the thin center and then the shoe on the end, and that was brazed onto the V shape that had been swedged earlier. All of that was cut into the bottom of the capital and brazed in, and then a slot was cut across the top of the capital, and the carved bow was then brazed into that slot. This key is a solid key, and it is something I brought because it's such a good study piece. When I got it, the key had been twisted in a lock where somebody forced it, and the wrought iron was damaged. It had opened up, and I had heated the key and packed it back together, not welding, but just pushing the grain back together and straightening it out. And then I put it in acid to remove the new fire scale. 6 weeks later, when I was fishing something else out of the acid bath, I found this in the bottom, and the layers and of the iron where the slag had been eaten away were so sharp it was difficult to handle. I was upset at first, but after sanding that so you could touch it, it really makes a good display piece because you can see where the bow was split so that the grain, which is a feature of wrought iron, would follow the two sides. It was split, opened up, and then brought back together and welded here. The grain follows all the way around the bow, and you can see where it was welded. There's a diagonal scarf showing there between the two. The bit is obviously a later replacement. That's modern steel. However, you can still see the end grain of the tenon that broke off from the original bit, which was longer than the replacement. It was about 1/4 inch longer. This piece I brought because this is a skeleton key. This is a real skeleton key. This would be used for opening a lock and avoiding any wards in the center. So many people call every big old key a skeleton key, but this is the actual thing. So the next line of defense for both locks with tubular keys and locks with solid keys would be the warding inside. Wards are pieces of metal that block a key from passing that doesn't have clefts cut in the right place to fit past the wards. So when I assemble a ward box like this, I make one ward, and usually it would be the center ward that bridges from one leg to the other, and I would get the key cut to fit that and rotate nicely, and then I would add a ward on one side and get the key to fit, and then a ward on the other side and get the key to fit. And that way, if there's a problem anywhere, I know it's on the ward that I just put in to the lock. This one is slightly more complex. The area across here is where parts of the lock that need to be struck by the key would pass and make contact with the bit of the key. The opening in the bottom is to let debris that gets into the keyhole fall out, or debris, if it's a lock that's open within the room, dust and whatnot that falls into the top to fall through. So this one has just a little bit more warding to it, and the wards are a little finer, and so the clefts are finer and a little closer together. This one has a heavy piece that was swedged. Wards like this appear in the Diderot Encyclopedia. They were swedged straight and then bent into the arc that the key follows. The shape is cut from the key to pass over that ward. This would be the top where the key strikes either two bolts or a bolt and a tumbler. I'll talk about the tumbler in a moment. And those two things would be separated by the bridge ward through the center. And this chest that we've been using as a backdrop for the other filming is inspired by the Mastermere chest found in Sweden, a chest that contained blacksmith and woodworking tools that was unearthed in a farmer's field. Most of the hardware was missing, so much of the work on the hinges and hasps and lock is supposition based on what was found, and there has been a little bit of simplification using period techniques to replace some pieces I couldn't identify in the original lock. But this key has a pin that sticks out the front that goes into a hole in the bolt to help it rotate. It rotates and lifts two pins inside the lock that raise the springs that retain the bolt. So it's turned clockwise till it pushes the pins up. It's slid sideways to move the bolt, and that releases two hasps, and the chest can be opened. The key cannot be removed without locking the chest again. I have another lock of similar construction here. You can see part of the bolt blocks the slot that the key slides in to move the bolt. It also gives the key something to push against besides bearing on the hole at the back of the bolt. The bolt, when it's slid, moves out of the two staples in the hasps so that the hasps can be lifted. The spring, which is split so that the two parts have to be lifted individually, is lifted when the key goes past the single ward there and lifts the two pins so that the bolt can be withdrawn. When the bolt is slid forward again into the hasps, the spring falls into place behind this piece, which prevents it from being withdrawn. So this lock has the next level of defense, which would be a tumbler. This is a lock that takes a tubular key, has a pin in the ward box, and so the key can only go in from one side. The lock is operated on the inside by hand. There's a handle on the bolt and there's a handle on the tumbler. The bolt can be thrown forward just using the handle on the bolt, and unlocked to draw the bolt by lifting the tumbler by hand. Now this one does not have a positive catch in the front, so if the door were slammed, inertia could sling the bolt forward. This ornament here on the tumbler is on the below is what strikes the key, and the key has to strike the tumbler and lift it before the key strikes the bolt. Then it's already unlocked. I'm gonna go the other way. So I can lock the door from the outside using the key and unlock it, turning the key the other way. Generally, the key turns clockwise to unlock a lock. The coil spring up top is a little sloppy, and some of the examples I have covers on them, so you can't see how sloppy they are. This English style case lock is one that I made in a class I took from Peter Ross in the 1990s while he was still the head blacksmith at Colonial Williamsburg. This 3-day session at his shop, which was sponsored by the Guild of Metalsmiths that gave me a grant, really helped my understanding of locks. Even though we concentrated only on English style box locks, looking at all those examples helped me see what was going on in pictures and books of all kinds of locks. This has a solid key, which means it can have a keyhole on the inside and the outside. This would be interior, where the box is mounted on the surface of the door. The key rotates and lifts the tumbler and then throws the bolt. Now this has never been finished. There would be a cam and a doorknob for the latch bolt, which I haven't made. The key also works. This would be going through the door. The shoulder on the stem gets the key in the right place for the cleft in the center to go around the bridge ward, and that lifts the tumbler and throws the bolt. It's very hard to see the tumbler in a lock like this because it's behind the thinner part of the bolt. Now I've got another example here I'll show you, and then I'll show an illustration. This piece was out of a stock lock. It was a way to save money by not having an iron case. That you could see here how thick the bolt is at the business end, but how thin it is inside the lock, and that gives space for the tumbler behind. This warding system looks a little bit like the Diderot style with the swedged ward, but it's not swedged. Each of these shapes is just a little plate brazed to the bridge ward. That would take a key. This is not the key for this lock, but it would take a key that looked like this, that avoided those different pieces attached to the bridge ward. Over here, there's a drawing. This would be looking down from the top of the lock. This is the bolt. When the keyhole, when the notch in the bolt for the key is produced, the metal that would be cut away otherwise is bent up, and that forms a little tab that sticks to the back of the bolt. The tumbler is made with a single tab also, and when the lock is unlocked, this tab is to the back of the tab on the tumbler. When the lock is locked, that tab would move to the front, and all that has to be filed carefully so that when the bolt is at the termination of its forward motion, it's tight against the tab on the tumbler, and when it's drawn, it's tight on the other side against the tab on the tumbler. Tumbler pivots here, the keyhole is straight to the center just below the tab on the tumbler. So this is a stock lock in its wooden case. This one would represent a greater savings over the other one because many of the parts are actually attached to the wood, so you don't have to have as many pieces of metal even as the other one has. This, you can see, was a rived piece of wood split from a log radially, and they didn't even worry about planing the wood to even thickness. It's thicker toward what was the outside of the log than it is on what was the inside, because these are all pie-shaped pieces as the wood is split. Later ones were sawed out of beech most often and are totally parallel front to back. But this would have been a very inexpensive lock in its time. Another type of tumbler is the spring tumbler. And there's one in here that's difficult to see, but the spring is the tumbler. It's not a spring acting on a tumbler like the others. When the key is rotated, it strikes the tumbler first. The tumbler is raised out of a little notch, and the bolt is drawn. In reverse, didn't line it up. In reverse, the key strikes the tumbler, compresses the spring, lifting the tooth out of the notch, and the bolt is thrown forward into the hole in the shackle of the padlock. Here's one where you can see the spring tumbler better. This was a cabinet lock. When the key compresses the spring, the bolt is free to move. It drops into a notch at both ends. Here's a spring of that style all by itself. This one has the part that's struck by the key in the back, just as the padlock did. This one has it in the front. So this box lock has a very large spring tumbler in it. That's the same operation as this is, that orientation. Something that I should mention here is that these cases are built with these 2 tenon pins. Some of the padlocks have 3 tenon pins. These have a tenon on the side that goes through the wall, and then the locks that are open on the back have a tenon that holds the face on, and the padlocks have a tenon at both sides that hold the front and the back together. This one has a single wall that goes all the way around, which is later than the style that has the back wall formed from the same piece of iron as the front, and then a side wall that's separate on top and bottom. One more type of retainer for the bolt is a spring that's actually on the bolt. It's I don't know if I can compress this, but if no, that's not going to work. I've got a drawing over here, I'll show you. The key lifts the bolt and moves the bolt forward, and it goes from one notch to the other over the wall of the lock inside there. This is the bolt with the spring formed as part of the bolt, generally just work hardened to make it springy. The bit on the key is long enough so that it lifts the bolt so that the bolt comes up out of this notch and then can advance and drops into the other notch. And that way it's retained, but it's not a separate item. It's not like you have to strike 2 things, so it's not as much protection as the separate tumbler. So up until now, we've been looking at dead bolts that have been either locked or unlocked. These spring bolts are always locked unless the bolt is being drawn by either the key or by hand. These would, as door locks, would be locked every time the door was closed. Most of them have some type of a element in the back to put a thumb against so you can draw the bolt. This key, you can see the wards pass each other. There are 2 simple wards, but because they pass each other, there's no straight line from the stem of the key to where the key strikes the talon on the bottom of the bolt. So from the outside, the lock is operated with the key, and on the inside, it's operated by hand. Now, to make that more defensive, more secure, because you don't have a tumbler, sometimes there were 2 bolts made in the lock, so that both have to be struck by the key. The key has to get around the wards and strike both bolts to open the lock. Something I'll mention about spring-loaded locks: because the key does not make a full revolution, which is impossible because the wards are held at one side, there can be closed clefts, wardways within the key. All the deadbolt keys have every opening either open to forward or rear edge or the outside edge, because the wards are attached in those places. But this one advances to unlock the lock and then returns on the same path, so that ward can be fastened on one side and allow the key to be totally enclosed around the opening. This one has no handle on the bolt. This is a cabinet lock, so this would be used on a cabinet that a person couldn't fit into, so there'd be no need to open it from the inside. The ward box, we've been calling this a table ward, has the simpler style pin in it. So this pin has a head that's just bent to one side, an L head, and it's got a blind rivet right there, and that holds it in place. The pin on this lock has a T head, which is the most secure fastening for the center pin. The wards in this little lock are just a couple of finger wards. They don't block any access to the middle of the lock. They just prevent a key that doesn't have those two clefts cut in it from operating the lock. This is an antique lock and a key that I made for it. So this is a medieval style chest lock that would not require any cutting to be done in the front board of the chest. This is one I have not quite finished. It's getting close, but it would eventually have a hasp with a staple that went into this slot and be retained by the bolt. Often the hasp would be hinged to the lid in the center and take a jog on the top of the lock and then come down this side to have the staple go into the mortise there. This is a spring-loaded lock. The spring is above and the direction of the force is transferred sideways by the pivot here. That draws the bolt back. The key has an enclosed wardway in it, which is possible because it's a spring-loaded lock. This is a chest lock that would require cutting into the front board. I believe it's missing the rear staple here that would stabilize that bolt a little better. This one is spring-loaded, and it's got a little table ward here. The sheet of the lock face is in pretty bad shape. This is a type of padlock that follows the form of the chest lock. This would eventually have a back put on it. Most of them are riveted. I have considered folding the edges of the back over this, which would then give me a place to do some roping on the border. This one is a deadbolt. That draws the bolt back, which releases the swiveling shackle. The walls here, besides being decorative, prevent a person from sliding something under the bolt to pry it off. This little part here is the only piece you might be able to catch, but the decorative piece on the bottom prevents you from getting under it. This has a spring and a separate tumbler. The key strikes the tumbler first, which is lifted. You can see the bit hitting this curved part of the tumbler. That's lifted, and the bolt is thrown forward and then withdrawn. Oh, no, I got that in reverse. I turned it over. So I'm withdrawing it, which opens the lock. This is a Renaissance era, often called a gate lock. All the works are on the front plate. I could see that this had been removed in the past, and it had some broken parts, and so I didn't feel bad about taking it apart to see what was inside. There's another one of those spring tumblers, and a simple bent ward box with no wards at all. This originally had a complex shaped keyhole, and it did have a ward at one time, and that's something I did add to it when I did my copy. You can see the two tenons that hold that ward in place. I'm guessing that this is not the original shape of the keyhole, because that's a much later style profile to the end of the key. But I did something similar to what I thought was on that one, which might have been a later modification. When this draws the bolt back, then the staple can be lifted out of its slot. This one had a long slot. Later hasps on this type of lock often had a shorter mortise and a staple in it and a flat piece on top, sometimes protected by a rim around it to keep it from being pried off with a tool. But this style fits down in there. There's no way to grab anything on the side, and if you were to grab the little bit of metal in the end, it would just bend. It wouldn't pry the hasp out of the lock. So this padlock is another one inspired by Viking Age technology. The case is brazed together, but held by tenons on the ends of these ribs while it's being brazed in the fire. The key goes into a slot in the back and compresses the springs. It's just a simple square on the end of the key, but the little nose means that the key has to have a slot cut in the key to be able to go flat and then make the corner. When opening a lock like this, you want to keep pressure on the shackle so that when you push forward, the springs that are being compressed are not dragging across the inside of the top of the lock. If that's held in place, the springs are free to be compressed, and then it's not as hard on them as if they were being rubbed against the top of the lock. When the shackle is put into the lock, you can hear the springs snap open once it's inside. So the locks from now on do not involve a bolt moving back and forth into a mortise or a staple or a keeper. This is one that I refer to as a P-lock because of the shape. They're also known sometimes as barrel locks. There's no nose on the back that the key has to fit around, but in this case, the keyhole is curved, so the key has to be curved. Also, inside, the springs are wider than the bolt, and so there are notches cut into the key beyond the shape of the bolt. When the key reaches this little tenon on the side, the springs are compressed and then the bolt pushes out of the lock. The end of the shackle is cut for all those pieces to pass. That's locked. This is a later style set of handcuffs. This is a screw lock. The threads inside the key are pulling a spring-loaded bolt back from the end of the shackle so that it's released. When the key is unscrewed, the bolt is pushed forward by the coil spring into this little mortise. And the key can be removed and the lock is secured. So these next few locks are all locks that have hooks that grab staples on the lids of chests. They'd all be mounted on the inside of the chests. This is the staple. This end would be clinched to the wood, and the other end would have a large headed rivet on the outside and that was peened over on the pad on the inside. And this is a very strong form of staple. The ones that are tenoned into a plate are more likely to come loose, especially with the pressure exerted on the staples from the hook. Every time the chest is closed, it has to push the hook to the side, and then the hook snaps back to lock it. This is not the staple for this particular lock. It would give too much space between the top of the front wall and the lid, but it's the type of staple it would have had. The bit of the key strikes the bottom of the single pivoting hook, and the hook is then pressed against this fairly heavy flat coil spring. This rack has two hooks. I brought this one because most of the other wards are hidden inside ward boxes. This one is freely visible. You can see that it's attached at one side. The key can pass over it and then stops. And that's why the key can't make a full revolution, but can have an opening in it that's not cut clear to the outside of the key. Most of these have the flat coil springs on them. The rack moves along a bar on the inside, and a lot of them are kind of flimsy. This one I particularly like because of the decorative file work done in the bolt, or the rack. And this would never be seen once the lock is installed in a chest. There's no way you could see that once it's in place. So that's either a selling feature when this is displayed in the shop, or it's just because the blacksmith couldn't help himself and had to decorate his work. This again is probably not the pair of staples for this lock, but it's the type it would have had. The tooth here is for locating the plate on the lid of the lock. The plate with the staples would be placed in the lock once it's installed on the chest. The lid would be closed, and this would make a mark. That would be bored into the chest lid, and then the staples and their escutcheon could be positioned on the lid of the chest that way. This has the L-shaped base to the pin rather than the T-shaped. But both are stronger than the single tenon which is what this pin is just tenon into the back, and those often grow loose with time. This one was helped some because of the collar around the key that supports it, gives it a little more support than just the pin alone. This one is interesting because it's a combination bolt. This bolt has the spring as part of the bolt that allows the bolt to be lifted, and the wall of the lock goes from one notch to the next as it's locked and unlocked. And it also has a hook. So we've got the combination. So the bolt is unlocked, and I was just able to push the hook back with my hand. So the staples are beveled so that it can slide in. This escutcheon has two corners turned up, so those make marks in the chest lid so that the escutcheon can be located on the lid of the chest. And this is definitely the keeper that goes with this lock. This one is another lock that has hooks that would grab staples. These hooks are sprung outwards, and the key would act upon them to bring them inwards, which it doesn't work anymore. Somebody has removed the ward box. I don't know what was going on here, because the keyhole would come from this side. There'd be no keyhole in the back. Somebody might have tried using a solid key and tried two different centers. I don't know what was happening there. But you can see the really crude wrought iron sheet, but the ornamentation inside that would never show once the lock is in place. It's just kind of an interesting piece. And this is a crab lock. Here, the two pieces that act on the keeper on the lid of the chest, which would be an arrowhead shape, pinch equally on both sides, and this does not bend the keeper like so many of the hooks that push in one direction do. I brought this one because it was kind of interesting to see all the hammer marks on the outside here forming the sheet. Otherwise, it's not in very good shape. I think that the spring is probably work hardened rather than hardened and tempered steel, and it's kind of lost a little bit of its oomph. This has a T-shaped head on the pin, which is a better pin than the L or the single tenon. This is one that I made in a class with Peter Ross at Tunnel Mill. The keyhole is off-centered. It doesn't make a full revolution, and that opens the two grabs and holds them open. The lid, when it was closed, would force them open, and they would snap shut on the keeper on the lid. This one is an old one for which I made a key, and after I made the key, I found that the lock doesn't work very well anymore. It only moves one of the grabs. But what is interesting about this one is there are two separate levers. The others have a single lever that pushes one grab one way and the other grab the other way, and only needs to strike the key in one place. But this key has to get around the wards and strike both levers, which, when the lock was new, would have opened them equally. There's also a fairly nice bevel on the inside here to receive that arrowhead-shaped keeper without wearing it so badly as square corners. This one is a later piece, probably late 19th century. It's factory rolled sheet metal. I just thought it was interesting because of the two separate coils, flat coil springs, rather than the round spring on the bottom. It has a single lever that would open them both. It has a cheap tenon, single tenon rather than a T or an L on the end of the center pin.
You're ready.
Okay, this is a chest that was made by Dave Johnson. It was painted by Judith Chenstead, and I did the hardware for it. So I brought this along because it has a cased crab lock and the only example of a keeper that I have to show. So that when the lock is locked, would strike, open the two grabs, and then they'd close upon it. So this is a combination lock with 4 wheels. It has a bolt that is swedged. It's a round shaft with a spline on it with notches cut in it through which the wheels pass. And then it can move when the wheels are lined up properly. It doesn't come completely out. Some of the combination locks have bolts that slide out completely when the combination is lined up, but then they get lost. So this one, I need to get it a little tighter, but this one, when it's locked, holds the shackle in place. So the way to pick locks like this is generally to apply a little bit of pressure and then turn the wheels until you feel one give, and hold that one there and turn another one until you feel it give a little bit, and then when you get all 4 of them lined up like that, the bolt comes out. But to prevent that, you can have your real gate, and if you stamp a false gate that goes part way through the solid plate on each of the wheels, you don't know whether you're in a real gate or a false gate when you're testing. And so that makes it harder to pick the lock. So this would be the round stem with the spline running down it with the notches cut in it for the wheels to roll. So the next defensive feature I'll talk about is the trick keyhole cover. Often locks will be the same front and back. Now the evidence of wear here shows me that this is what I made, but that shows me which side it is that opens, and the keyhole cover is, there's a spring underneath and there's a cam down here so it stays out of the way. There's a notch in the side here. There's a depression in the back of the keyhole cover that fits over the center pin. So when that's in place, the spring pushes the cover up and it can't be opened until it's pushed down so that the protruding pin lines up with the notch in the side. This is a spring-loaded bolt that catches the notch in the shackle. This one I made after repairing one that was 25% larger. This is a 1-inch square shackle, and it had an 1.25 inch square shackle. The keyhole cover is removed by turning the fleur-de-lis 90 degrees and then pushing it around the corner in a slot that then allows the keyhole cover to fall open. There's a little hook here that goes into behind a tooth up there, and when the fleur-de-lis is taken around that corner and down, that pulls this hook off of the tooth in the top of the little portal. This one is spring-loaded also, has 2 bolts that are withdrawn by a quarter rotation of the key, maybe less, 1/8 rotation. This is my version of a Gothic chest. When I saw these in a book, I thought, why are we looking at the backs of all these? Because I'm seeing the hinges, but the front and the back are the same. And the back has 2 hinges and the front has a hasp and a keyhole cover. The way to tell is to look at the bottom. The hinges are turned under the bottom and riveted. The hasp and the keyhole cover are turned under the bottom a little bit, but not riveted. I also noticed that a number of the chests had little square looked like bolt heads. And I thought, well, that must have something to do with the secret catch. So I made these with little hooks on them, and each one has a dot that when turned to the top turns a little footed tab on the inside to release the keyhole cover. The center one on the hasp does not turn, because that's where the bolt goes. That's where the staple is. Need my key. Again, it's a spring-loaded lock, so it can have a opening in it that's not all the way to the outside. So the lock is on a plate that's fastened to the inner front of the chest with staples and wedges through the staples. So the staples are on the inside of the chest, and the wedges go through on the inside of the lock plate. Can you see that? The lock inside here? So this coffer, often called a Nuremberg chest, it was used for church funds or municipal funds. It was made to have 2 padlocks on the front and then a key that operated the lock and the lid. So 3 different people had to be involved to get the chest open. Nobody could go to it on his own. Often there's a secret catch for the cover to the keyhole in the top. They usually have a false keyhole in the front to distract people that are unaware that that's not the right keyhole. This one doesn't have a rivet that moves to allow the keyhole to pop up, but it's spring-loaded down and can be pulled up and then turned to the side. So the key goes in there, and we're moving 5 bolts, so it takes a good bit of force. So there are 3 bolts across the front, a bolt on each side, and then there are 3 hooks in the back, and all of these go under the lip. This is made to hold it open while you're organizing the contents. They appear to be mermaids chased on the lock cover on the inside. I was thinking chickens because of the noses, but they look like maybe they're supposed to be mermaids because they seem to have scales and fishtails on the back end.